Hi everyone, it's Dennis again. Today we're going to be talking about another high-end point and shoot, the Canon G1X Mark III. This is the third and most recent in Canon's line of large sensor compact cameras that offer good controls, a robust build, versatile shooting options, and great image quality in a compact body. This is designed to be one of the most powerful small cameras, at least with a zoom, and it should be ideal for travel and photography on the go. I've been shooting with it for the last couple months, and I'm going to tell you what I think about it. The G1X Mark III was released at the end of 2017 and is still the current flagship in Canon's venerable G-Series, although it's high time for a new model. Canon's been making G-Series cameras for over 20 years, and I've shot with a number of them over the years, including the G6, the G10, and most recently the G1X Mark II. The original G-Series cameras used 1/1/7 inch sensors, and the more modern ones use 1-inch sensors, but the G1X series uses larger sensors again. A 1.5-inch sensor in the G1X Mark I and Mark II, and the G1X Mark III steps that up to a full APS-C size sensor. Speaking of that, let's jump into talking about the specs of the camera. The G1X Mark III is a compact camera weighing only 400 grams, but it has a fairly modern 24 megapixel APS-C size sensor. I believe it's the same one as the Canon 80D and EOS M5. It's a much newer and better sensor than the one in the G1X Mark II, and I'll talk more about that in the image quality section. Its max ISO is 25,600, and it has dual pixel autofocus. It has a 24 to 72 millimeter lens, which is a standard zoom range, and it's f2.8 to f5.6 with image stabilization. It's got a built-in EVF, a flip-out screen, a flash, and a hot shoe, an integrated ND filter, and it's weather sealed. So let's talk a little bit more about the body of the camera. As you can see, it's something like a micro DSLR, and then it has a traditional DSLR form factor, just squished down into the size of a point and shoot. The camera shares a very similar body design to the Canon G5X Mark I, although that has a smaller sensor. Like a standard DSLR, it keeps the viewfinder in the center with a flash and a hot shoe on top. Despite not looking like very much, there's actually a pretty decent grip to hold onto here. In addition, it has a good number of physical controls. The position of the front dial is unconventional in that it's moved from the top of the camera onto the front, rotated 90 degrees from normal, but I find it's comfortable and works well. There's a rear dial around the D-pad, as well as a zoom rocker and a dedicated exposure compensation dial on top. On the left side is a PASM/mode dial, and the lens ring can also be used as a customizable control wheel. I believe the viewfinder is OLED and has decent eye relief, although it has an overly sensitive auto detection feature that sometimes triggers when you're trying to shoot from the waist. So I turned that feature off and I set the EVF rear LCD toggle to a custom function button instead. The rear LCD is 3 inches in size and about 1 million dots in resolution, and it flips out to the side in a fully articulating fashion. People sometimes think these side flip screens are something new, but my G6 from 2005 operated exactly the same way. The battery for the camera is pretty tiny and notably smaller than the Mark II's battery, so make sure to bring a spare. The camera still uses micro USB, but at least it can charge via the USB port. One more thing to note about the body. The G1X Mark III is weather sealed, and it's one of the only weather sealed compact cameras available with a large sensor. I haven't tested it extensively, but it does give me some comfort living in the rainy Pacific Northwest. Let's talk about the lens a little bit. It's a very standard 3x 24 to 72 millimeter zoom range with an f2.8 to f5.6 aperture. That sounds a lot like what you'd get from a kit lens, although the f2.8 on the wide end is a bit faster than the aperture on most kit lenses. It has image stabilization, and it does take 37 millimeter filters. The lens is sharp and high quality, but overall, I feel like it's a step back from the lens on the G1X Mark II, which had a longer 24 to 120 millimeter range and also had a brighter aperture. Sure, the Mark III's lens is smaller and lighter, but it's also less versatile. You can use digital zoom to make up the difference, but it's not the same. Moving on to performance and operation, there's a lot of good things to say here. The camera has Canon's dual pixel autofocus, which is fast and reliable enough for this classic camera in both stills and video. It has a built-in ND filter, which you can set to automatically activate in bright conditions. And because it has both an ND filter and a leaf shutter, the camera can be quite versatile to use with flash, and I've had good success using it with off-camera flash. Another useful feature is the mobile app support. The camera has solid Wi-Fi and Bluetooth integration with your phone, and I find connecting to the mobile app is easier than on my other cameras. On the Mark II, the mobile app was supported, but only captured in JPEG and had limited control of the settings. Here, everything works much better. So what do I think about the image quality on the Canon G1X Mark III? Generally, I have lots of good things to say about it. Image quality is better than, well, most of my cameras, but specifically, it's much better than the G1X Mark II, in that the dynamic range is noticeably better than the older camera, and I find it totally sufficient here. With the Mark II, you could take a great looking picture, but it required you to get the exposure dead on. With the Mark III, you get quite a bit of latitude to fix everything in post, both in the shadows and in the highlights. And 24 megapixels is plenty of resolution for me, and I honestly can't think of many reasons I'd ever need higher. It also gives a good deal of room to crop in post. And while I choose to shoot in RAW, I've also noticed the JPEGs on this camera are much better than those from the Mark II. I haven't tested low light extensively on the camera, but shots at ISO 6400 that I've taken seem usable. I think the low light limitations of the camera are more a result of the aperture of the lens than the performance of the image sensor. If there's one aspect of the G1X Mark III that's a disappointment for me, it's the video performance. When this camera was first released, there were a number of YouTube videos out asking if this was the perfect vlogging camera. And the answer to that question is a firm no. There's no 4K recording, stabilization's only so-so, and there's no mic jack. Although these days it's easy enough to use a small wireless mic with internal recording and sync it in post. But if video is a priority to you, you'd be better off shooting with something like a Sony ZV-1 or maybe keeping a separate dedicated little video camera in your bag like a DJI Pocket 3. If you're more casual about video, the G1X Mark III might meet your needs. It does have good autofocus, and it can record 1080p at 30 or 60 frames a second. I've also had good results using upscaling software to scale the footage to 4K in post. This can improve the video quality of a lot of cameras, and I might make a separate video about it in the future. Actually, the video quality here did look better than what I was expecting, probably because I have good lighting set up. So, depending on your use case, this might actually be sufficient. It's up to you to decide. The G1X Mark III is both compact and versatile, and so there are a lot of other cameras you might want to compare it to. Against any 1-inch sensor camera, the G1X Mark III is going to have overall better image quality. However, the video quality of something like a ZV-1 is going to be better. So if you only want to bring one camera and you need to prioritize video quality, it might be a hard choice. There aren't many other large sensor cameras with zoom lenses available. The LX100 Mark II is probably the closest competitor. The G1X Mark III has a larger sensor, better autofocus, and a flip-out screen, but in its favor, the LX100 has a brighter lens and 4K video. Compared to the G1X Mark II, which I reviewed previously, it's somewhat more complicated. The sensor on the Mark III is much better, and overall the camera body is smaller and lighter. It's also more forgiving in terms of slightly off exposures, but the Mark II has a brighter lens and a longer zoom. I felt it was a more complete travel camera, even if it weighed more. With the Mark III, I'm tempted to take a second body with a telephoto lens, and that's usually my Nikon J5, to make up for the long end of the zoom range. Also, my Mark II was less than half the price of the Mark III. Fixed lens point and shoots are another option, like the Coolpix A or a Ricoh GR. A Ricoh GR is smaller and has a similar size sensor and image quality, but of course, it doesn't have a zoom lens or an EVF. And the final alternative you might consider is a dedicated mirrorless camera system, like Micro Four Thirds or Canon's older EOS M system. While the camera bodies might be a little bigger, being able to change lenses makes those systems more versatile. So, what's my conclusion for the Canon G1X Mark III? I think it's a great camera, especially for someone who cares primarily about photography and not video. It's small, well built and easy to use, and it takes great pictures. It might be the best small camera I've used, but it's also one of the most expensive. I still don't think it could be my only camera though. If Canon ever does release a Mark IV, I would love to see a slightly longer lens and better video specs. Until then, I'll be using the Mark III. So, those are my thoughts about the Canon G1X Mark III. Please share your thoughts down in the comments below, and if you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks again, and bye. We're done.